Hi, and welcome to the Mystic Chat episode 3. I'm glad you guys could join us and either in person or on YouTube. Every Sunday, we're loading up these episodes to YouTube, so you could see it for the first time there, or you could see it twice, or 3 times, or 4 times if you like us that much. Today, we're going to talk about fairies and things uh, like that. And when we discussed it last weekend, we all had forgotten that it's Beltane weekend. So I guess we're just in tune with those energies and things like that, which is great. But first, let's go ahead and do introductions. My name is Chris Allen. I'm an ordained minister with the Fellowship of the Phoenix. I'm also a 3-time, about to be 4-time published author, and a Native American pipe carrier. And so my experience or my views in these discussions always come from those backgrounds and things like that. I'm also a leader of a traditional witchcraft circle. So you'll see that point of view. I would like to nick out to introduce Ruby Ruse and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much. Hello, my name is Ruby Ruse. I'm also known as Amy Alice. So if you're looking to send me a private message during the Zoom, you'll be looking for Amy Alice. But I go by Ruby Ruse, most generally speaking, because I am a performer and a YouTube artist. You can find my channel on YouTube. It's Fairy Fortunes, which I'll try to have. I will go in the comments when this video is posted, and I will make sure that there's a link to my channel there. On that channel, I talk a lot about the Fae and how they are a part of our modern reality. And with that, I would love to introduce our next panelist, Mr. Luke Babb.
Hey everybody, my name is Luke. I use they, them pronouns. I am a member of the Fellowship of the Phoenix, which is how I know Chris. I'm also a what I often call myself a skeptical spirit worker. I work in a hard polytheist way with the Hellenic and Norse pantheons. And other than that, I kind of consider myself a jack of all trades. I am really interested in learning as much about as many different kinds of magical practice as possible. Part of why I am so excited to be here with these excellent and very varied group of people. And I think with that, I'd like to introduce Laura Gonzales. Laura, would you like to chime in?
Hello, everybody, and thank you for being here, and welcome to whoever's watching live or later. And my name is Laura Gonzales. I'm a bruja, I'm a witch, I'm a pagan priestess, I'm a Dianic ordained person, and I exchange a whole lot of different hats. I know these wonderful people because of the Phoenix, of course, and I'm very honored to be here yet again. And I do podcasting, and you can find me on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Blog Talk Radio, Spotify, etc., etc. And that's all I have for today. Thank you for inviting me again.
That's awesome. All right. So it's Beltane. Some people, if you're from the Scotland area or the Irish area, they like to say Beltane or things like that. And it's funny because I've seen it spelled like 18,000 different ways. And if you're on my personal page or my Twitter or Instagram, I spell it 18 different ways. Partly it's because it's kind of fun and you can do all types of things. But anyway, so today here in Chicago, I think it's cool because the weather and the energies of the season are actually kind of in sync. It's 72 degrees here today. It's beautiful. I'm so excited. But we were talking before we started to record the show, and Luke was saying that he walked outside, and next thing you know, wait, there's leaves and there's flowers, and wait, what's happening? I've been inside so much. So and I wanted to know how you guys were celebrating the season of Beltane. I know in my personal circle is going to do it on the full moon. We're going to do it online the best we can, just kind of for connect that way. But how are you guys celebrating this season? Ruby, how are you celebrating the season?
Well, it was very interesting. I was really inspired by Laura last week when we were talking about ritual. And so that was kind of my theme after that. So I was like, how can I, not only was I looking at my everyday rituals that really made my life more comfortable, made me feel more like myself. But I was also like, you know what, it's time to do a ritual, like a ceremony and do some celebration. And I really hadn't had it in my head that it was Beltane, but I was like, I'm gonna go outside and I'm gonna do a celebration for the Fae and I'm gonna make cakes. And so I was outside in my backyard. I didn't go anywhere and nobody was invited except me and the spirits. And it was really a beautiful ceremony. I think I learned some things from the spirits that were gathered, and that was a really exciting experience. What about you, Luke? What were you up to?
Well, like Chris said, I have been inside a lot in the last while. And I think we've all been talking about how we both feel very in tune with the seasons. I think maybe because that's a lot of what we have to feel in tune with, and also very distant. I had been going on walks pretty steadily, and then there was about a week in which I wasn't able to do that. And I went back outside the other day and I was like, oh, spring happened. When did spring happen? But I actually don't observe the Wheel of the Year as seriously as some other folks do. So a lot of my Beltane traditions are with community. So tomorrow, the local Wild Onion Grove of ADF is doing a ritual that I will probably be attending. Seattle's Temple of the Fellowship of the Phoenix is doing an online ritual, which is open, which I'm really excited about. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do for myself. Maybe it just means getting outside and like reconnecting. What about you, Laura? Are you up to anything exciting?
Well, it just so happened that is the first of the month. So, you know, first of the month, candle. So that happened. And I had this beautiful horn masks that I bought, I don't know, in the fall, and it was gonna be my Beltane mask, and that's what I was gonna wear at ritual, and so on and so forth. And then yesterday, my hair was all over the place after a couple of days of not being washed. So I thought it was the perfect look for a photo session. And since we are all living online, I did myself a little bit of a Beltane photo session. And that was kind of like my observance and celebration, kind of like my very own cyber ritual type of thing. And that was yesterday. So the candles and that. And then, of course, today, this morning, we were at the cyber online ritual that Circle Sanctuary shared for the community. So that's kind of like my cyber life thing that I've been doing. I'm like you, I have to be walking. I walk my dog at least 2 times, sometimes 3 times a day. I try to make it 3 times. And I've been observing, you know, the trees and everything. And like you said, you know, spring happens suddenly. And what I am going to try to do is bring up my camera so I can take some photos of the little trees and the little things that are sprouting all over the place and share that with folks, because some people are actually not even going out for a walk. So I think that'll be a nice Beltane season observance and something to share with people.
That's awesome. It's so funny that you were talking about the camera because you know I'm a jogger and some of my other friends are like hardcore marathons, which I'm not. I'm like after 5 miles I'm good. But I wanted to take pictures of some of the flowers and some of the trees. And my favorite things in Chicago I love so much. It just feels like Beltane is, you know how you're going to some neighborhoods and the trees have flowers and oh, it's so awesome. And I hesitated because I was like, I don't want people to judge me for jogging outside and being outside, so I'm going to be secret. But now that I know that a lot of people are going outside and stuff, and because anytime I did go outside, it was always with the mask and social distancing, and plus, just I think I said this before. There's a park about a mile and a half down my street that's nobody goes to. I think it used to be a golf course or something. It's nobody goes to. I just run around there and come back. But now I'm like, yay, I'm gonna take pictures and post them. The pictures I have been posting, especially on my Instagram, is that, you know, I try to keep all my professional things on Facebook and everything, but I've been posting this saga of Chris's hair, and Chris's hair is getting longer and longer and longer. And before the show, I'm over here like getting all this water going flat, 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 because it's just getting crazier and crazier and crazier. And I'm just like, and of course I have these people, I have my friends like, so why don't you just do it yourself? I was like, every gay man knows, never do your own hair. Every gay man knows this. Like, I would rather it be shaggy and long. But anyway, so with that, I just wanted to let everybody know that we are going to be answering questions after the talk. But if you do have a pertinent question about what we're talking about today, absolutely feel free that you can. Let me just unmute Laura. Feel free to ask, but some of the questions we may not be able to get to until later on. But anyway, with that, we have the fabulous Ruby Rose talking about fairies today. I'm so excited. I think we all are. We've been holding our breath for this conversation. So take it away, Ruby.
Well, I've gotten this reputation as being like an expert on the Fae, and I'm not sure that I would classify myself as an expert. I just listen. As what I would say, that's the thing with nature spirits. What I refer to as the Fae are non-human entities that live with us in this world. So they are not somewhere else. They live here in our world. I do believe that trees have spirits of their own. I believe they have souls. I believe every plant has a soul. I think nature spirits like that could be wrapped into a definition of Fae. I absolutely believe that fairy creatures right out of story tales are a part of our world. I believe that there are elves and dwarves and gnomes and sylphs and some of them I don't even know their names, but they are there and they are out there and they are trying to communicate with us. And I just started listening. And then I mentioned that I am a performer, and I started doing performance at fairy festivals, and just with being around that fairy energy and encouraging that fairy energy, it just went from there. And I even designed my own divination system called Fairy Fortunes, where I take fairy creatures from around the world, and those are my symbols that I use to tell fortunes with. So I did a lot of research on these creatures from around the world, and I really think that the key, if a person wants to work with the Fae, it's about opening your heart, opening up your mind, and allowing them to communicate with you, and then your job is simply to listen, is really what it is. I'm really interested in Luke's Nordic spirituality, because I know a little bit about Norse mythology and North practices and heathenry, just a little. I wouldn't consider myself a heathen myself, but I know that in the Norse pantheon is that there is a lot of connection to the Fae there. So I'm just curious to know, Luke, do you ever work with like the Fae? Do you ever welcome the elves, for example, in ritual or anything like that?
Yeah, so Norse stuff is very similar, but it has some differences that we are all kind of trying to figure out. So because it's Beelzebub, because this is about when I start to really feel him present. Freyr, right, is the Lord of Alfheim. I'm seeing everybody's faces, and everybody's like, "Yeah, Freyr," which is a absolute, like, this is the correct answer. Freyr is the Lord of Alfheim, and we sort of talk a lot about what that means. Backing up a little bit, it is understood that when you die in Norse mythology, your spirit does a bunch of different things, right? And there are a bunch of different options for it. And depending on how you read the texts, either your spirit is made out of a bunch of different parts and something different happens to each of them, or you kind of have a roulette wheel of the afterlife. And one of the things that can happen is that you can become an elf. And that's a weird sort of borderline question, right? So you can kind of become the spirit that lives in the hill that you were buried in, where your descendants come and visit the hill. And if somebody digs you up, then you come and wreak your merry havoc with them. But there are also spirits of the earth that were not necessarily ever people that also kind of count as elves, and bunches of different kinds. And some people work with them more than others. I would say the people who work with the Vanir work more with the elves. As for me personally, the elves are actually something that I kind of struggle with, which is why I was so excited to talk to you about this. Because my background originally is learning about elves and fairies from, frankly, from William Butler Yeats. And yeah. And those, I mean, many of those people are not really people that you want to invite over. Like,
Yeah, and that's the thing about fairies, I think, because like people are like, "Ooh, I want to bring fairies into my life." I'm like, "Oh, are you sure?" Because one of the things that I've really been taught from them, because I really feel like these beings have come to visit and have very much shared some wisdom and knowledge with me, is that they do not have morality. Morality is a human construct. So in the fairy language, there's several, I think, but definitely the one that they are teaching me, there is no word for good or evil, because there is always good within the evil and there's always evil within the good. So if you think about it, the worst dictators of the modern age that we've lived through, or perhaps our grandparents have lived through, those dictators believed that they were fighting for their people. So they thought they were a hero. They didn't think they were an evil villain. And it's very much that way with the Fae. That's why they don't recognize a difference between good and evil, because there's it is both and neither at the same time. So yes, many fairy spirits, I think, can be benevolent. They're very excited to be around humans and share wisdom. But at the same time, those beings can be just as malevolent as they are benevolent. And then there are some beings that are more inclined to be malevolent towards humankind. There are non-human spirits, what I would refer to as the Fae, that are very territorial. They want to be left alone. And so if you encounter them in the wild, they might be inclined to be what would be perceived by a human as malevolent, because they are trying to remove you from their territory. So, but that said, I have very wild, somewhat malevolent spirits that like to come and teach me things. So, because they don't recognize evil and good. Just because a creature is territorial, if he decides that he likes me and has something that he thinks would be useful for me to know, or he finds me interesting because I'm a human that actually is listening, then he might be inclined to come and teach me something useful. But I think your caution is like very, I think that's exactly what the fairy spirits, I think if they wanted humans to know one thing, I think it would be exactly what you were saying, Luke, is that you do have to be very respectful and careful when you're working with them, because there's always good within the bad and there's always bad within the good.
Yeah. And I think another of the things that I definitely wanted to ask you about is, so in my practice, there's sort of different classes of spirit. And it's not like hard and fast rules, like things can move between these different like definitions. So you get like nature spirit, like this is the spirit of this hill. You get like a spirit that might both be the spirit of the hill and an ancestor. You get a troll, which isn't from this hill, but owns this hill now and will fuck you up. I mean, it mess you up if you try to. So, do you experience like different kinds of spirits? And could you talk a little bit about that in the Fae?
Absolutely. I am pretty certain that every single home has more than one fairy spirit living in it. So if you think of R.K. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter series, she actually did quite a bit of research when she wrote her books. So the little house elves that she has in her books, or if we look at the Spiderweb Chronicles and the little brownie that Thimbletack that lives in the house. Yes, those are fictional stories. They were meant for entertainment, but those were based on older pagan practices with the idea that we share our living quarters with these fairy creatures. So I do believe that each apartment even has its own little spirits that live in there. They can be brownies or little winged sprites is what I would refer to them as. Outside, you're going to encounter the souls of trees, which I would categorize as like nature spirits, like you were talking about. And in addition to that, in addition to those trees, I really feel like there are these larger wild somethings, like trolls. Like we think in America that a troll is a very specific kind of creature, but I think it was actually you, Chris, that told me that the word troll is kind of a catch-all term that we would use in the same way that we use the word fairy or fae.
Yeah. So I actually have been doing a whole lot of research because my fourth book coming out, a little plug, my fourth book coming out around Thanksgiving is about the other world and specifically the Celtic and Nordic other world with a little dash of Native American stuff. And in my research, because how I learned about the fairies, and I wasn't booked taught at all. It's like my teachers were like, here's how you introduce yourself. Here's how you do a shamanic journey or a trance, whatever. And this is how you have a relationship with them. And I didn't have a name for it at the time. Like I was confused because in my experience, I was talking to these very noble beings who are quite tall, but I was always taught that the Fae is, you know, this big. And then I came, my cat is acting crazy. I came to understand through research, in certain time periods, they call, like for example, in the old Celtic paganism, when paganism was the dominant culture, everything had a specific name. These noble beings are the Fae. These are tree spirits. These are spirit of the woods. And these are sprites. These are whatever. But in the Middle Ages, everything is called a Fae, or everything is called a troll. Depending, is like they don't care. It's a Fae, an elf, a nature spirit, a tree spirit. It's all the Fae. And so now, you know, people are a little bit more specific. And in my own teaching, just for clarification, for brand new people, I do say, okay, the noble class of people who, you know, you think of the Queen of the Fairies. These are the fairies. These beings are sprites. These beings are house spirits, whatever. Same thing with the elves. About the exact same time in the Middle Ages, every spirit that was outside was called an elf. In fact, some of the confusion is, and I talk extensively about this in the book, is from my experience and from my conversations with the elves and the Fae and stuff like that, when the fairies are not dead people. They are not dead people. They are a being of the other world and of nature and so forth. However, if I die and I'm like, I really have a connection with the fairies, instead of going to the land of the ancestors, I have a choice. I can actually go to the land of the fairy and enter the other world. I think that's part of the confusion, is that, you know, someone on Samhain or a Beltane walked into a fairy ring or into the fog, and I'm in fairyland, and oh, there's Queen of the Fairies, there's the knight, there's so and so, oh, and there's my dead friend. Okay, so they're all just the dead? No, they're very separate beings. However, here's the thing I have learned, and what I try to teach this. I hope I'm doing a good job at teaching this. At the end of the day, some of these words are just semantics. If you know who you're talking to and you call a wood sprite a fairy, so what? You know, so what? It's not going to hurt. And in fact, I'm sure that wood sprite will get a great, you know, would be very honored you call them a fairy, you know, and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of it, it's just, you want to make sure you know who you're talking to. And if you don't know, ask, who am I talking to today, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have found that some of the Fae don't have the same need for labels that humans do sometimes. So sometimes they have like a name, like Chris or Luke or Laura, but as far as having, like, naming their people, that's not as important. And sometimes they don't have like a name like we would, like a human would. And other ones, like I had an experience on a shamanic journey with a very specific type of Fae being that was very tied to fate. Actually, on some of the research that I've conducted, is that the word Fae or Fee has the same root as the word fate. And so a lot of times fairy creatures will be involved in the fate of just the universe, which also includes humankind. So they are interested in us because we are a part of the great web of word, if I can borrow from Luke there. So this very interesting fairy creature wanted me to name her. And so I actually named her Sarah, and she's like, "Why Sarah?" And I said, "Because it was the first thing that popped into my mind at the time. It was kind of scary." So she's like, "Okay, that'll work."
I love it.
And what was interesting about it is I had never seen a being like her before. And then actually doing some, just because we're all at home, and I was poking around on the internet, I actually found some Reddits and stories of children where children have seen what they call the bone ladies.
Mm.
And
I know, I'm already interested. What? The bone lady, what?
Sarah is a bone lady. She has a very, like, her face looks like it's made of porcelain, and it's just a very almost heart-shaped face, but it's made of bone.
Mm. Cool.
And then her hands look like skeletons. So it's very and she was very much in part of fate, and she seems to be tied explicitly to my fate strands. And that when I say fate strands, I'm also talking about the possibility of reincarnation, or maybe what Luke had mentioned too about the soul having different parts and how those might scatter and take separate directions. So she works with that energy, and that is tied to me, as she was explaining, or tied to my family, maybe a bloodline. So she's very, it's like she's taken a special interest, like she's taken a job and she just picked the Christensens, you know, and that's the company that she has decided to devote her projects to.
You know, interesting, in part of my research, and I didn't talk about it in my book, but I found this very interesting, and I can very much see this in you, in the things you're saying and talking about. They say, and I think you said this to me too at one point, the Fae have a very long memory.
Yes.
And I was learning, and I pretty much sure you said this too, that they've recognized souls life after life, and if your family member or your great grandfather were good to the Fae and the elves, and they had a good relationships, they remember you. And you have to remember, the Faes aren't spirits like the gods or spirits like the ancestors. There's, how I've experienced, it's almost like they're a mix between spirit and nature energy at the same time, but because they're in spiritual form, they can see our auras, they can see our lineage through our blood, they can see all kinds of stuff. So I can totally see them say, "Oh, Ruby, I remember you." I can totally see.
You know, speaking of seeing, now that you mentioned seeing things, I am very sensitive to feeling energies. You know, I feel the energies of the departed. I feel the energies of people when they have a good energy to themselves, or the alternative, and so on and so forth. And growing up in Mexico, we are heavily Catholic and pagan Catholic. You know, we grew up with all these rituals and stuff. And then there's a lot of things that on the folklore of what Mexico practices as Catholicism, there's a lot of folklore infused into it. So fairies, trolls, and angels are around to either reward you or punish you. So me being a pagan, I declared myself a pagan at 16. I was like no angels for me, no fairies either, please, no trolls. I was like, I don't believe in none of that. It's not part of my realm, it's not part of my life. And it wasn't until like 12 years ago when a person, very wise person, told me, not because you haven't experienced that, it means that it doesn't exist. Because I, like Luke, I'm very skeptic. And Q to probably 8 years ago, maybe, I was at the Blue Mountains in North Carolina. And they're real. They're very real. They're very real. They made themselves, they made themselves very, it was very much like, look at me, I'm right here. And we know that you can sense us. And that was an experience for me. Mind you, I grew up in the city. I'm from Mexico City. The closest thing that I know to a forest was like the city park that I was one block square. And then I moved to Chicago, where the biggest forest I've ever seen, was one of the local parks here in Bridgeport. So when I got to the mountains in North Carolina, and the family that was hosting us, they say, let's walk the land. And we took like a 1.5 mile walk. My goddess, these creatures are amazingly strong. They're really impressive. I don't know if what I felt was trolls or fairies or what, but not only they made themselves present, but they were, to me, they felt very playful. Like they just wanted to be seen. They just wanted to be, to have that communication of, we know you can feel us. So we're here to like, hi, how are you? And have a good time. So that after that trip, I came back a believer. I'm like, yeah, they're real. Spirits of the forest or fairies or trolls or whatever, and then of course I abide by now, no, because you cannot see it, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just some people might see it with these eyes and some people might experience them. So Q2 a few years ago, and I know you're going to appreciate this, Ruby. I've been hired to go do a house cleansing. And this was, I have their permission to share the story, by the way. And I'm doing a house cleansing. This is a commune, self-made artist building. And there's about 5 or 6 different artists living on this building, and I'm cleansing the space, and I see something, how we see things is not with this eyes, but and I'm like, I need to go clean over there. And they're like, no, it's the cat. And I'm like, it's not the cat. And let me just go clean there. And the person that hired me actually sent me to the other corner. And I'm like, okay, there's a reason why you don't want me to go there. And then they called me an hour later and they said, oh, by the way, this corner that you wanted to go clean is right by the kitchen where all of our spoons are being missing. And one of the artists that lives here does pottery, and their pottery is being missing too. And I'm like, yeah, you got fairies. And
Yep.
and it was your fairies who told, I don't know if I could have made them go or not, but I guess it was not my place to make them leave. And so what I told my friends is, hey, what I know traditionally is you have to like make them feel welcome and give them food and honey and milk. And, you're all artists here. So yeah, you have to like retribute some of this inspiration. So I love that anecdote because in my very limited knowledge of the fairy lore, they inspire artists. How true or how legit you think that claim is? And this is something I learned from my Mexican upbringing, and then a few witches and people that I know here in America, in United States. have also said, you know, you have to feed the fairies, you have to give them food and honey and flowers and all that. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Well, the fairies operate on a gift giving system. So they don't perceive, like I said, that all homes have spirits that are living there with you. Humans might have built the walls, but they don't see it as it being our homes. They see it as it's their homes and you're living in their home. So just living with them to them is considered a gift that you're sharing space with them. So because they operate on a gift-giving system, a gift demands a gift. So you want to start establishing a relationship. And also they often are interested in having a relationship with you. If they're living with you in the home, if they've decided that they're going to inhabit these walls that humans have made, like I said, they see it as their place, but they do want to establish a relationship with the people that they're living with. So a lot of times they really like taking pairs of things. So a spoon goes with a knife. A spoon goes with a fork. So they're taking the spoon, so they have the spoon, and now you have the fork, and now we're connected.
Oh.
So, and one of the things that they love to take in my house is they really love keys, because to them, keys are magical objects because they open portals. So they love that energy.
You know what's so funny? All this time, and I've been a pagan since 1992. I never knew that, and I'm hearing that, I'm like, that makes so much more sense. It's not just about this shiny object. That makes it awesome.
And
I'm so glad that my intuition was on point, because this, not only this, the artists in this commonplace, they're artists, but two of these artists people, their physique is very pixie-like, you know, what people call pixie, the pixie look. And I'm like, you guys give something back to those fairies, please, because you stopped me from cleaning that corner. So
when I was listening to your story, I was like, oh, they know. They just don't know they know.
Mm-hmm.
Reason they didn't want you to clean theirs, they had this sense that, oh no, that's our friend. You don't need to clean there because he belongs here, or they belong here.
And lo and behold, it was the very tiny threshold between their kitchen and their little city garden is the perfect spot for a fairy or a family, because I don't think it's one fairy.
Oh no,
I think they have like a colony or something in
I
there.
think there's multiple spirits. I had the opportunity to talk about the Fae once before on Magick Radio Chicago. I know you, Laura, know about Magick Radio Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the guests, my friend Trudy, was asked, and she's like, I'm always missing gloves. My gloves, one of my gloves always disappears. And I'm like, oh, they love pairs because they take one glove and then they leave the other one for you so that you have this connection with them. And I said, so if you are in a home and you keep finding that one of your gloves keeps disappearing, don't replace, well, you'll want to replace the gloves, but don't throw away that missing, that pair. Don't throw away the one that you have, because that's the fairies establishing a connection with you, and they'll keep taking the gloves until you
That's cool. You know
connection.
what I would say is, I'm sure you would agree, if you have a fairy shrine or a fairy sacred place in your home or garden, would you put your glove on that as saying, hey, we're connected this way? Would you say that that's a
Oh, absolutely. Because then you're acknowledging, yes, I want to have this relationship. I do want to be connected to you.
That's awesome. So
Probably won't take the glove then, unless you get a pair that they really like.
I want to share something real quickly. the Mexica Tenochca people, what the world know as the Aztecs, our people, there is such a energy. Mind you, they don't like to be referred to as pagans because they're native people. And of course, this spirits that we know them as spirits is to them is the energy of the land, right? But there is something that, to describe very briefly, it could be kind of like an egregore, if you will.
Mm.
And they have a specific name. They're called chaneques. And chaneques could be extremely feared by people, or they could be extremely revered by people. I, for one, as I said, growing up in Mexico, that was like, no, I don't work with that. Which I learned very quickly not to say that anymore, because it's not my choice who am I going to be working with or not.
Yeah.
So I decided,
Yeah.
the day the Virgin of Guadalupe decided to, like, you're going to work with me because you're priestess of the goddess, I stopped saying that. But anyway, back to chaneques. If you tell Mexican people, like, oh, you have chaneques, or there's chaneques around, they know exactly what you're talking about. And is very similar, yet not the exact same as fairies. And like you were saying earlier, Chris, I think it's just semantics, but they are also kind of like spirits of the land, spirits of the energy of the home, and they could be fed. And of course, when we have so much Catholic influence merged with our native culture, there's a lot of school of fear with it. But I wouldn't be surprised if they are just the Native American cousins of the Druid fairy cousins, you know.
So here's that actually, I know we're wanting to move directly into questions. So I'm going to ask the first question.
Okay.
um, because I have been thinking a lot about, like I said, a lot of my background is like Ireland, Northern England, Iceland. I live in Chicago, which is Native American land that's been colonized, right?
Mhm.
And I am of the personal belief that like some of the spirits here have been brought over with people who have moved here. Um, but I also know that there are lots of native spirits
Right.
who me looking around might be like, that's a fairy, but that's not necessarily how they think of themselves or how they were thought of long term. And I'm wondering if people have thoughts about how to interact respectfully with native spirits.
Um, I'm sure.
You're the Native American.
Well, Laura can probably help me with this one too. So, how I was always taught through all kinds of traditions, you always honor the spirits of the land that you're on. And so, the thing that always bothered me was when white people, and it's only white people who do this, you're not supposed to give tobacco to the native spirits. I'm like, so we're on the spiritual land, and you're saying I, as from only part white, but Caucasians can't give offerings to native spirits? That's silly. Um, I will say what I find, and you have to remember my background is very ecstatic, shamanism, things like that, and I always say that until your intuition and you're able to see spirits a lot more clearly. One of the easiest way I have found is through a shamanic journey, where you just close your eyes, imagine the land, because like in the dream, that's the astral, that's the other world, and ask them, and you can have a conversation with them. I mean, that's how I was taught to do it, because a lot of times, especially if you're got used to that energy, you're like, oh, are you a spirit? Are you a fairy? Are you an elf? Are you one of the native spirits? What are you? And at the same time, we're also afraid of being offensive. We don't want to be like, I if I was Irish or something, he as an Irish person, all spirits are fairies. I think that would be disrespectful to the specific spirits. So that's what I would do. Laura, what do you think as a...
I would totally piggyback on that, and I think Ruby explained it very clearly at the beginning. You know, you asked to them, you asked of the land, or you asked of the space. And I have also did a wonderful 2-day thing with Phyllis Carrot when she was here in last year in September, about listening to the spirit of the land, or to the entities of the land. And even what she was saying is, even if you see a tree, you call it a tree, but you don't know what it named itself. So part of it, I think, a combination of what Ruby just said and what we learned with Phyllis, is literally like, what are you? And the entity, the land, the earth, the spirits, they will describe themselves to you as, I asked a tree, like, what are you? And you all know I have the worst phobia of insects. And the first answer that I have is, I house these creatures, and a huge spider came around the trunk of the tree. And I'm like, okay. I was about to hug the tree, and the tree was like, no, you cannot hug me, and then send the spider out. So I think it's very important not to name people or things, well, people, mainly people, but not to name things if you don't know who they are. Mm-hmm. I had learned, being Native American myself, being Mexican, being a descendant of the Mexica people, I have made the mistake of learned the wrong way not to call Mexica people and culture pagan culture, because it's not pagan culture. It's a living culture that is still native. And they might be exactly the very similar practices, but they are a living culture, and they don't like to be called themselves pagans. So it just made my description of what I do a little larger, right? I'm a pagan priestess, and I'm also a practitioner of the Native American folklore and traditions. So be it. It's not a big deal. I will do the same for the land, like Chris said. You know, who is here? May I honor the land before I begin my pagan whatever. And I think, out of respect, offering tobacco or offering a welcoming, as in, before I do my thing, I want to honor you. And I don't know who you are, but here's this feather that I found on my way here for the land, or here, this is a little water, or if you have tobacco, go for it. I don't know who you are. I don't know your names, because I'm not from here, but I know this is your land. So I'm just going to borrow it for a minute to do my thing. So let me offer this, and then open my circle, do my thing, and then close my circle, go, by the way, thank you, and off you go. You know, that's how I will approach it. You know, I hope that answered your question.
That's awesome. That was a beautiful, beautiful way. I'm going to go ahead and...
Cassandra sent a great question in the chat. You kind of answered it, but I'd like to go further if you don't mind.
Sure. Let me go ahead and stop the recording, because we're hitting an hour.
Oh.
And then we can answer questions and stuff.
Okay.
Going for a little bit.
Please come see my YouTube channel, because I talk a lot about indigenous fairies to America and all kinds of things. So I hope you check that out. It's Fairy Fortunes on YouTube. And you can also find it through my website, which is www.fairyfortunes.com.
That's awesome. And when we post this on our pages, don't forget to put the link to your pages and things like that. All right, everybody, thank you for joining us. I'm going to stop the recording, and then you can answer live questions and things like that.
All right. Well,